game anytime.
Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Any War Game Anytime podcast. I'm Daniel. I'll be emceeing. Bozz is out today, doing something more awesome than what me and Sam have been doing, which is pouring through the new 3.0 rules, digging into things. But before we get into that, Sam, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. It is technically my birthday today for anybody who is interested.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday. And what a great birthday present. OPR 3.0, huh?
Yes, indeed. I have had a lot of fun looking through the rules and building a bunch of lists to see what's new, what's changed. So happy to have a chance here to dive into some things we like, some of the things we don't like, and point out some things we've noticed as well.
Yeah, and I think and yeah, we want to get into some caveats when we start this. We the first of which is we have some things that we don't like, but I guess we want to address them, Sam, as more concerns, not really problems. We don't know if they're going to be problems. We're not sure about some of them. So we want to, I would say, right, Sam, more address them in terms of concerns at this point, right?
Yes, and something that we think that both other players, the devs and us should kind of pay attention to in game to see how they're going to work, because we you can't always get a complete understanding just kind of by looking at the rules, and sometimes you got to get into games and see how it affects the in-game experience and whatnot, and uh that's all we're talking about. So take everything with kind of a grain of salt here. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is, I think that we can safely say it's a new edition. There is like a lot of stuff has fundamentally changed how the game plays. And it is important. Me and Stan, we've played a lot of the previous edition. We have a good grasp of the game, but we are thinking about it in the previous edition's eyes. So that's the first thing. The other thing is to keep in mind is that me and Sam are more focusing on the quote. We're really talking about this in the realm of competitive viability, right? We're not like me and Sam. We love the army builder. The custom army builder is great. Both of us are using it. Sam is working on some Mage Knight stuff for it. For our Mage Knight campaign. So we love the army. The custom army builder is great, but we're primarily going to be focusing on our thoughts regarding the current what's the word? The current competitive, or the current standard armies. Is that a better word? How do we say that, Sam?
Sure. That's fine. Yeah. As if we were going to host a tournament for Age
Yeah.
of Fantasy or for Grimdark, and say, because it's a tournament, and you don't want to let everybody take their kind of custom armies, just the armies that are rules made by the people at OPR, and how those look, and if we were trying to, like, let's do a hypothetical tournament with some prize on the line, and so you're wanting to bring your A game. That's what we're kind of looking at, and right now.
Yeah, and me and Sam, both of us have come not just from Kings. So Kings of War, both me and Sam, we play Kings of War. We're both good players. We both won our fair share of tournaments. We also play it very competitively, but we've also played other games competitively. And so, in other words, if you are looking to play OPR for fun and break out your custom army, some of this stuff may not even matter to you, and that's perfectly fine. We're trying to say, let's look at these changes and let's see, exactly what are some of these things. But before we get into that, we don't want to be doom and gloom. Let's talk about the good, because there is a lot of good in this edition that I think is let's just go through it. So one of which is we're looking into it. General troops just feel they're less expensive, right? We've generally seen point cost reductions across the board, And in context to that, we've actually seen shooting be a little more expensive, right?
Yeah.
Um, it it seems simple, but maybe they were concerned that shooting was pretty powerful in the game, and I think that they were right to do so. And so maybe they're saying, hey, an easiest way to balance this is to just effectively make your shooting cost more and put more troops in the field. It's a pretty simple solution, but it's a pretty good one, right, Sam? I mean, just
I agree, and I think it's a good overall a good change. That based on what I've seen is because you could still make a very good shooting list, but it is going to be a little bit more expensive to do so, and you're going to have to kind of balance that tactically with the fact that somebody could flood the field with goblins or orcs, and you're going to have to kill a lot of them before they get to you.
and you're going to
Uh,
kill more of them than there were in the previous issue. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I generally, and this is again, probably feel right now it's good. We'll see how that plays out. Now, casters, I would say, it's hard to judge whether casters is good or bad. It feel because it is such a game changer. I would say right now, me and you saying we like it, right? It
I
feels
do.
more tactical.
Yes, it feels like uh, it's more tactical, more consistent, less like, okay, I'm going to try and roll a 5+ and get this super powerful spell, and if I roll that 5+, then well, I guess I am going to be good. Now you as a player have a lot more control over your spells. A lot of the damage spells got toned down, so they either do less hits or less AP, or they only target one thing instead of two things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of the lower level spells in general got toned down because those kind of were in our experience were the only ones you would really ever use because they were the
Yeah.
ones to cast on a 4+ or a 3+. So it was like, okay, well, I'm only going to cast those spells, and they're really good. Now those have gotten toned down a bit. The level 2 and level 3 spells, I think, have gotten a little better, uh, and they're a lot easier to cast. You can kind of the way the magic has changed with using spell tokens, and so that you can kind of hoard your spell tokens if you want and save them for later in the game. You can kind of contribute, have casters contribute to other casters, and so if you really need this caster to cast a big spell, you can sacrifice kind of the potential cast of your other casters. It's really good, and I think that it's more expensive, and it is going to have to change the way you play casters because you're going to be a lot more inclined to protect them. Uh, you're going to be not wanting to necessarily run them with your frontline troops as much, uh, where they're going to get picked off. You're going to want to keep them safe, but you'll get that consistency, which I really like.
Yeah, and I think it's great that they tone down the damage spells, especially because casters now, like especially to me, the things that are really powerful now are those troops that can get caster levels, where you can basically use those troops as almost moving nukes. If the damage spells stayed the same, you could take your unit of, let's say for instance, warlocks or what's the wood elves are the deer sisters. You could basically send them in, charge them in, keep your casters 18 inches back from them, and then effectively channel some nuke spell to hit their back line, right? I really like that, and I think that there's going to need to be some tweaking. Did they nerf damage too much? Didn't they? We'll see. I also agree with you, Sam. I think some of those effectively caster four that you cast on a 3-up on the old edition were a little too powerful. The worst of which for me was the -2 morale. On a 3+, you could give, and we did this in one of our games, right, Sam?
Yeah,
You could give
it sucks.
you could give two on a 3+ with an undead, you could give 2 units -2 to their next morale. Like, that's just for a 3+. Like, that's pretty powerful. So generally I would say we see casters, we like the overall system. We do think it's probably going to need some tweaking. All right. Caster's good. The counter rule. And so we like the option, but there
There's
could
some
be
hidden
some.
utility. There's some hidden utility here that may not be immediately.
Yeah. So
There's
overall, I think we like counter as a rule. We'll get into we'll let Sam cover some of the concerns, but especially in Age of Fantasy, let's be honest, Age of Fantasy really was starting to boil down to an impact phalanx game, right? Where it's
yeah,
it
and
really, because everything else paled in comparison to impact and phalanx. It was just like
yeah,
it
and you don't
really was too much.
and
And
Age of Fantasy compared to like Grimdark has less things with really high defense. So you had a lot more things with lower defense, which means you would just charge in with some knights and the impact would just kill everything.
yeah,
And which can be fine, but it's also because cavalry should be powerful in my opinion. But
I think it stifled creativity.
yeah,
Um, Me and Sam, we play fun games, but to be honest, if me and Sam were running competitive lists, we were running Impact and we were running Phalanx. It's like
yeah, yeah.
and that's where we want to focus it from. Um, Counter,
There's a yeah.
yeah, counter
There,
really, yeah. Go ahead, Sam. It's a
there's some really great synergies with characters though that can take spears and have counters. So the obvious one being you could have a fighty character now with a unit that doesn't have spears, but your character does, which means they're going to still get to strike first, uh, and possibly pick off one or two or three enemies before they get to hit you. That's really strong. And the other uh,
maybe
it,
problematic. Let's talk
yeah,
about the
yes,
possible problem.
yeah. The possible problem is when you put your character on like a dragon and give him a spear. Based on my reading of this, and I think Daniel
It is
also,
correct. No,
yeah.
technically, you are correct, Sam. There's no doubt
So
about
yeah,
that.
your elf lord on a dragon with a spear, the whole model has counter, right? So you could park them in front of some knights and just say, "Come at me," and now your impacts are only on a 6+, and that's 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 really strong. It makes your characters on monsters against things that are impact reliant, just a whole lot tougher.
And that
Uh,
may be fine because I honestly felt that characters on dragons were a little expensive. And
yeah.
we're not saying maybe it is actually fine, but it is like we were saying this from a competitive standpoint. If you run a character on a dragon, am I wrong on this, Sam? It's an auto include. You give that guy
Oh yeah,
a spear.
I think it's
This is,
clearly the best option is a spear.
yeah, give them a
uh,
freaking spear.
yeah,
Like,
and they did point that correctly based on what I'm saying. The spears are the most expensive option in a lot of cases, which is good. It's what it should be. But it is definitely gives a lot more viability to those, and gives you kind of that way to your character on the big monster is going to be can be kind of an anvil and really
mm-hmm.
hold the line. Whereas in the past that was a lot harder. It was a lot of points and that could just get wiped out pretty easily. I think I like this change, but we're going to have to see how it works
From a
within the
competitive
game.
standpoint, too, you have to worry about triple. Like, again, we're thinking competitively. Um, Triple characters on dragons may be an issue. We don't know. Possible. We'll have to look
Yep.
into it.
Yep.
Next thing we're going to talk about new cover rules. +1 defense is great. One of the things that +1 defense does, as opposed to -1 to hit, is it actually makes high AP weapons and high armor, high defense more important. If you're an armor 6 up and you get hit with an AP 2 weapon, even if you're in cover, it's useless. It's almost like cover is more important now for units that have a little more armor on them because they get that extra bump. And the other thing, it actually is a buff to high AP weapons because now
Yes.
those high AP weapons, as in real life, will just punch through cover, right? It's like
Yeah.
if
It
you're on a
makes more
fence,
sense. It makes
yeah,
sense that from a standpoint of realism. Yeah. I mean, your volume but less impact shots are gonna get stopped by the cover, but your whether it's your bolt thrower or some kind of sniper is just gonna you could potentially pierce through it. It makes sense from a realism standpoint, and I think it's going to be a good addition to the game as well, a good change.
mm-hmm. Stealth as well, I think is great. I love that it's a counter to stealth. Like I play high elf fleets, and I'll tell you, my striking scorpions were so stinking good. They could charge, murder something, and then they had stealth. I could also a lot of times move into cover. So I got some scorpions right in the middle of my units, and they're just sitting there. But I think that's a minor thing. Stealth needed to be addressed because of things like shadow stalkers and undead, right? Their ethereal gives them stealth, needed to be addressed. You needed to have a counter. But hey, as well, if you're worried that stealth is useless now, it's also cheaper. Stealth used to be relatively expensive. And it's great, right? You can actually bring stealth more option. It's you play it differently now. Stealth is meant to get you into combat, right? Stealth is meant to protect you when you're far off, trudging towards the gun lines. Once you're kind of in charge range, yeah, then it's not as useful. But
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I like it. Yeah.
I do too. And yeah, the I think it's going to be overall a good change, but something that's worth paying attention to and practicing with and learning how it's going to work. So
Mm-hmm. All right, another change. This is Age of Fantasy related. The new command structure, love it. Sam, what do you think? Just
love it. A lot of times when I was building lists in the previous edition, it's like, why would I bother giving a unit a musician or a standard bearer if I'm already kind of tooling it to try to win combat? It was kind of a useless thing a lot of times, or only I would only put it on if I had extra points at the very end of building the list.
yeah,
Now you actually have a legitimate reason to put a command group in. The sergeants were always kind of moderately useful.
mm-hmm.
They're fine. So those did not change, but the changes to the musicians and the musicians and standard bearers are huge. So
Yeah,
standard bearers now give you a +1 on any morale test you do. So that
yeah,
includes if you're getting shot at, if you're
yep,
getting, or in combat. Like that's a really strong change. Musicians also give you +1 move,
yeah,
which is much stronger as well. That's really it kind of makes sense too. You're marching to the beat of the drums. So it kind of keeps everybody in line, and that I think that both reflects kind of historically how these things would be used, as well as giving you a lot better feel in game. So
yeah. It's good
very stoked for that.
they broke away from an other games mentality, and they said, hey, let's do something better. And in this edition of OPR, I like that's what they're thinking about. They're saying it's time to move away from perhaps some of the legacy games that we're basing these off of and saying, let's make them better. And to me, I like them both. Also, just to me, I think that 10 points, this goes back into my fear discussion. 10 points for 1 point of combat resolution is too expensive. I'm not going to get into this a major problem. I am going to say that fear is overpointed. 10 points per combat resolution for 1, you might as well just spend 10 points to cause 1 more wound. So I think they probably should look at reducing fear's points, just a minor point as well.
Although I do like the change on fear from it being
it's definitely better
to being a set value, which is
at least
better.
you know what you're paying for. I will agree.
Yes.
Even though I don't think I would ever purchase fear on anything. 10 points and 20 points for fear 2 is, to me, I could spend 20 points and cause 2 more damage, right?
Yeah, and yes, that's especially for like army standard bearer for as an upgrade for your characters. I think is generally just not going to be worth it.
Yeah.
But we may be wrong. We may have to test some of that and see if it how it works.
All right, so a lot of good stuff. Let's talk about some concerns. Now, to be clear, me and Sam and Bozz, because Bozz, he isn't here, but he definitely sent us his feedback regarding regeneration and
in
Ren.
spirit.
Yeah, so he is definitely here. And Bozz, for him, Rend and regeneration are top on the list. And I think that it is for us. I think again, we've talked about counter on dragons possibly being an issue, but I think for me, the first thing I want to talk about is fearless. One of our subscribers mentioned this, and he said it was so true. Fearless to me is badly named. It should be called something like courageous or something.
or
something like
elite,
that, or
even,
elite.
just
It's
yeah.
not fearless. The other thing that he brought up, and this is one of our, he brought up this rule, and I think it's great. We actually do need a fearless in this game. I feel, me personally, I think we do. Um, there are too many. Like, I think Human Defense Force is a great example where you're paying 1,000+ points for a tank, and the fact that you could charge that tank in combat, do 1 damage or do enough damage to overcome whatever, and to have it waver on a 4+, it's just I think that I know fearless. I think there should be a rule in this game that's actual fearless that actually says
Can't
you
be wavered.
pass, or even you pass all morales. But I agree, at the very least, you can't be wavered.
Yeah.
I would prefer it to be more powerful. You actually have to kill this thing to a man. Now it should be expensive, and it should only go on super elite things. But
Yes.
I still
Yeah.
think that super heavies, that things that you're paying 1,000 points for. I mean, the moment, again, you can pay something 1,000 points, you can charge it with some unit, fatigue it, charge it again, and then waver it with doing a few more wounds on it. I think that for the super elites, for the super heavy tanks, there does need to be an actual fearless in the game, because I think that a lot of these big monsters and super heavy tanks, they're too weak. What do you think about that, Sam?
I agree, and I think that uh, the I like the fearless rule change for Age of Fantasy, especially. The way that it works now
Mm-hmm.
compared to how it works. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's a good change as a rule, but I do think that there should be probably something else that, yeah, is at the very least a rule, that's a special rule, that this unit can't be wavered, or this unit's a bunch of fanatical bodyguards and they're going to fight to the last man. You
Yeah.
know, and that
Or the
makes sense
unit is
too.
a super godlike being that's basically like, no,
Yeah,
you're gonna have to kill me.
yeah, and for Grimdark, and I have not played Grimdark yet. I'm more of a fantasy guy, but I do want to play. And I was watching Daniel play on last Friday, his first game of third edition, and yeah, just being able to waver the tanks was kind of, I thought was
Mhm.
yeah. I don't think that's helping the game, and I also don't think it's really a realistic thing. So
Especially a
we'll
super heavy tank. You saw the
yeah.
size, that tank is huge.
Yeah,
It was over a
yeah,
thousand
it
points.
was very big.
Yeah. All
uh
right. All right. So our next thing, and this is with Bozz in our heart. We've got to talk about, we have to really talk about, so we have to talk about regen and rend. And we can't, the changes to rend, I played one game and I can say I don't like them. I think that they're a concern. And more importantly, rend is now really inextricably tied to regeneration now. It just is. And that's because rend, it went from being a circumstantial, like effectively 1 out of 6 times you don't get a regen, to being 100% of the time regen is 50% less effective. It is just, it's, I would say this.
it's very specifically a counter to regen now.
Well,
And
yeah, but it's not just a counter to regen. They still have it at AP4. So it's also a counter to things like protected, right?
yep,
All that minus, again, AP4 just blows through so many things. It's also like rend is now the Uber rule. Counters regen, you can shoot it at troops. But guess what? In my game, when I played, you can shoot it at tanks too. You can roll sixes and you could just kill tanks with rend as well, right?
yeah, and it's I think you've got it. It's probably a little bit, at the very least, it's too cheap. The other thing, and I think this is kind of where we're getting, what I see in regards to rend and regen, and the kind of the way rules interact with each other. I think you create some really tough issues for balance purposes when
Mm-hmm.
you have rules that are like this is the specific counter to region, and it's, feel free to disagree with me on that. I would rather them I personally would rather them not be a like have that kind of relation. Uh, Ren,
No, I don't
not
think
have there
either.
be
Yeah.
a specific thing within Ren that is a counter to region. I think that's not good for balancing the game. I think it creates a lot of issues because then anytime you're adjusting the power of okay, let's say regions too powerful or regions not powerful enough or whatever. Okay, well you can't. It's hard to adjust that without actually also adjusting red.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
I will. So I will disagree on one point. I actually think rent is too expensive, mainly because they are
I,
now
I,
pushing.
I
So
agree. That's what I
in
said.
their
I
point
thought.
calculator, they are pushing this buff, this anti-region buff to rend. So now rend, you're effectively you in rend, you are paying for your ability to counter regen. The problem is that what if you go against a non-regen army, and what if you're an army like high elf fleets that basically everything has rend? Now that 20% may seem small, but over thousands of points, it adds up.
Yeah,
On the other side of it, when you face a regen army, you just blow them away, right?
yeah,
I think that, so for me, the other thing is, so I play high elf fleets. The first, I want to look at it from my perspective. Rend is too good in the sense it stifles creativity. I don't need to bring fire dragons. I don't need to bring anything. Rend kills light infantry, kills monsters, kills regen things, kills tanks. It's like I really don't need to bring anything else but Rend. And
yeah,
not only that, I don't need to worry about bringing any high quality Rend. All I care about is the sixes. This is
yeah.
my thought on it. By doing so as well, what I would, I think what you're saying is right, Sam. Balance Rend and Regen separately. From now on, Rend just doesn't do anything to
Have
Regen.
that specific reaction
Yeah,
interaction.
that's
And
gone.
the yeah, and again, it's because it creates too many problems within that, and it's also I do think this is probably a bigger issue in Grimdark than it is in Age of Fantasy for anybody who's thinking about this. Just because Age of Fantasy in general has less really high defense things, so you're this may be an issue, a thing where it should be pointed differently between Grimdark and Age of Fantasy. That's something that I think the devs might have to look at
Yeah,
at some
I
point.
hope they don't though. Like I think, see, all these
Yeah, I
things are
know, but
happening because that's the thing. We are having all these complex discussions, exactly what you were saying, Sam. Because Rend is a counter to regen, it makes all this more complicated.
well, it's supposed to be like a counter to region and a counter to high defense things, which is fair. But the problem is, as like you're right, is it's also just generically good, and it's
It's
also
too
just
good.
generic.
Like you
Yeah, it's generically good against everything. So it's kind of a
from a competitive standpoint, in competitive games, people would just be spamming out defender guardians, right?
yeah.
In Eldar fleece. But the other side of it is that not only is it countering your generation, there's tons of things with protected that give you the -1 AP. It's countering that rule too. That's why for me, I actually would like Ren to go down to an AP2 on a 6. I think that you really bring it down to AP2. This is going to allow people who have protected and have that armor 3 unit, maybe they're saving on a 4 and 5 now. I really think you just make Rend more of a mid-level anti-infantry tool.
Yeah,
Forget about the regen. Then you force people who have Rend to actually bring other tools. Now I have to bring my fire dragons. Now I
yeah,
have to bring other tools because Rend just doesn't solve all my problems.
and that's a good point. And I think that's a valid that's a very good thing for both Grimdark and for Age of Fantasy. I've looked a lot at the Duchies of Vinci,
Mm-hmm.
and they can pretty much get rending on every unit, and it's like when I was playing it became a lot of like, okay, I'm playing an army that's just looking for sixes,
Yep.
and it got kind of like, I don't like how that feels, and that's an issue. If you're for regular listeners of our podcast, we talked with Jacob Hampton last week or so, or 2 weeks ago. I can't remember now, but there's an issue, a balancing issue that's perceived balance, which incorporates things like how the game feels when
That's
you're
right.
playing.
Yeah.
And so maybe mathematically, if you're doing everything from a mathematical, so maybe it's okay. But when we're not robots, we're not playing this game as robots. We are humans, and so the feel of a thing as we're playing is an important thing to take into consideration when balancing. The game, it's a game. It should feel fun. This is a leisure activity for all of us. We're not professionals. We are just wanting to have a good time.
Well, and so we spoke about it, and we're going to take a little more time on, to be clear, we've got a lot more rule. Like, we're not going to cover everything today. So we've just got a couple more, but the rend and regen thing is our biggest concern. Because I also have to talk about, I'm going to speak for Bozz here. Bozz plays an army, Human Defense Force, which doesn't have a lot of rend. And he hates regeneration. He thinks regeneration is absolutely broken. I, as a high elf fleets player, think regeneration's not that great. Well, of course, I mean, I can mow everything down, but it's that other perspective.
And you don't want to get into a situation where your game feels like rock, paper, scissors.
That's right.
Where it feels like, okay, my army is good at only this certain kind of matchup, and I'm going to win that matchup. Whereas, that's so much of, when both of us play Warhammer Fantasy, at the worst times in Warhammer Fantasy, at times where I would sit down at the table and like put my army out and look at my opponent's army and their list, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna win or I'm gonna lose, because it got very rock, paper, scissorsy by the end of it, and that's not something that I personally want in a game. I want to be able to have the actual gameplay be the deciding factor in victory. I want my tactical decisions to be the deciding factor.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's the other thing, is that what is someone like Bozz, and we kind of speak because Bozz felt very strongly about this, and we want to speak on his behalf too. He felt regeneration was too strong, and we don't want, especially Grimdark Future, to turn into basically you have to bring Ren, and you have to give an army a certain amount of Ren. I think that's what we're worried. That's our biggest concern. We're worried that it's going to turn into a rend regeneration thing. All right, we are going to continue on here with our next our next concern, and it's more army specific. So let's talk about the other thing that it's the undead rule, right, Sam? It's a toughie, right?
It is, because I think it's probably going to involve a need for more playtesting from both us and from the devs and from other players, and to get feedback on. But based on our kind of cursory reading of it, it's a lot more powerful, and there's potentially some really busted things you can do in certain undead armies.
Yeah, this is us again. This is in the concern category. They have changed the points on some of these guys as well. So I know that undead with this rule did get a point jump. So it's a bit of it may not be as much of a concern right now, because we don't. What we can say is that it could possibly be that the undead rule may still be underpointed, because here's the deal. It is power. Okay, so it used to be that there was a pretty big counter strategy to undead. First of all, let's just acknowledge automatically passing waiver tests is ridiculous, right, Sam? I mean,
Yes.
having a unit never waver and never die is bonkers good. Like for
Yeah.
objectives control, especially the fact that wavered units
Yeah.
can't contest objectives. You get an undead unit on an objective, you
And you
have
have to
to
kill it.
kill
You
them.
have to kill it to a
You
man.
have to kill it. There was a counter in the old wares. Well, what you could do is you had a big unit. You could like maybe you could charge one, sacrifice it, and then when they're fatigued, you could just go in there and cause a few damage and barely win combat. And then they're having to roll automatically, and all of a sudden 1/3 of them dies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There was actually a counter to that.
Yes.
That
And that's not the case anymore.
oh, it's not. It's
Because
now
yeah, the way it works now, they you actually have to take a morale check, and
yeah.
you only take wounds if you fail the morale check. So all of a sudden, that strategy is not reliable anymore because maybe you win combat. Oh, but they passed their morale check. So okay, well, I guess they're not going to have to take the
That's a
undead.
wasted unit. Not only that, it's not just probably it's also in certain cases unviable because now, especially remember, and I look at zombies in particular, zombies get standard bearers. You can put a vampire, you can put a higher quality character in a zombie unit. That's a 2-up morale they're passing.
Yep.
So I'm just saying that like that rule is really it's not just
Yeah.
it's improbable basically now. You
Now,
have to kill those zombies to a man.
yeah. Now to be clear, it also when you are taking your undead checks, you fail on a 1 through 3,
Yeah,
as
that is
opposed
true.
to only you fail 50% of the time as opposed to only a third of the time. And that's so it's balances out a little bit that way, but it's also it. I think
You
this is
can
going to
do
be a
so
problem.
much to mitigate. The thing is, exactly, you can do so much to mitigate it on the first end that it's really starting to, like in certain cases. And I think what this again, undead I felt was balanced in that their elite units could easily be again, remember, that's why undead didn't want to bring elite units. Now elite units with undead are just so powerful.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, maybe they have balanced the point cost on it. I would say this: it's we're not sure if it's a problem, but and this is by when we say undead, we mean robot, we mean automata, we mean basically anything that has this rule, right?
Yes.
Undead and all its variants. I think we just really should keep an eye on it. If it were me, I I sometimes feel Sam. What do you think about maybe moving it that if they fail morale, maybe they die. It's a 5+ to stay alive. Maybe it's like, what do you think about that, Sam? Like,
I I'm not sure. I think that we're gonna have to do some games before
yeah, yeah,
I can make a definitive statement on this. And 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 we will. Don't worry.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. The important thing is the consistency is there for undead.
yes.
It really is
I
just there.
I think that it's going to be interesting to see, and it's I think it's also going to make your characters in Undead a lot more important,
Mm-hmm.
and which seems to be a trend with this rules change in general, which I think is good. There were a lot of times when me and Daniel were talking in this last edition, where it's like you characters don't really do enough for their point cost. I
Yeah,
think they're going to be, especially in certain armies now, a lot more important to have characters, to have them in the right positions, and I like that. I like that you're going to have to do that, and so we'll have to see how that kind of changes the game in terms of a balance perspective and a competitive stuff as well. So I'm looking forward to actually testing that. But yeah, the new undead rules, I
well, yeah. I would say
yeah.
this. It's a concern right now because I
Yeah.
do know this. I will say this. They did increase the points on the rule, so that's
Yes.
good. And again, we're just. I think that's more about where we're at. Is the points adjustments there, but also, do we really want to give undead any army, even for the increased points? from a usability, from a playability, do we want to give an army that much consistency?
I agree. And the other thing is, and this is something that the OPR does, but not every that I think they could learn from some other games, is having non-undead units in the undead in an undead army. I
Mhm.
think that that's something that they have not done as far as I have seen. All of the units in the undead list in Age of Fantasy, and that includes like Shadow Stalkers as well, have the undead rule. I think it's okay to have undead on some things in your list and not on others. So like for instance, in like vampiric undead, maybe your werewolves don't have the undead
Yeah,
rule. Maybe
your
your
bats,
vampires don't have your undead rule. And the
bats
bat and
too.
then get bat horrors, right?
Mhm.
It's like it seems like okay, we can have those things and you could lower the cost
They
accordingly.
are not undead,
They're not undead. They're yeah, make undead be undead, right? I mean that's and same with your vampires might not be undead either,
Mhm.
because they're kind of, I don't know, they're
It's
undead, but they're different undead because they're like the sentient undead.
I think for realism, I always say get the rules right and the lore can follow in place,
Yeah,
right?
I agree, and because honestly, that's as much as I love lore and I love deep diving lore, I would rather have the rules be a certain way, and then the lore be a separate thing in some ways.
Yeah. So we're going to go lower down the list. So this is a particular concern that we've had in the previous edition, that we're bringing up here. So me and Sam, we've had our conversations indirect, Sam. Um, it's I think especially when we get to competitive play, bringing if you're again, indirect isn't too much of a problem if you're kind of have that gentleman's agreement. Hey, I'm just going to bring certain indirects and not bring certain things. You really start going into a competitive environment, indirect's going to be a problem, right, Sam? I mean,
I agree. I think that I tend to think it's less of a problem than Daniel does, personally, but uh, it is definitely something that is an area to watch out for because it could create issue, and this may also be one that's more of an issue for Grimdark than it is for Age of Fantasy. So I will have to defer to the Grimdark players if it's more of an issue for them.
that is a good
Uh,
point too. It is a good point. I do play both, and I do see the prevalence of indirect being a lot more, but not just the prevalence, but the ability like to mass it, right? In Age of Fantasy, it's more there's just a couple of units that I think are a problem at Age of Fantasy. One of which is this slingshot for Da Vinci. So this Duchess of Da Vinci, it does have this scout slingshot here, which has AP1, deadly, sniper, and indirect. So it's a 24-inch range, basically, that allows you to, ignoring cover and hitting on a 2+, shoot a character with an AP1 deadly weapon and just
yeah,
be like, oh, thanks for, I'm going to kill your characters now.
and Vinci can also get a character ability that allows
To shoot it
their
twice. Yeah,
yeah to shoot it twice. So it's one of those things that like if you
I
can only take one of those, it's probably okay.
that's right.
But if you take three, and then you take like two characters that let you shoot them twice, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you have any kind of tough things in your army. You have characters, they're just getting picked off.
Well,
Uh,
and the other thing, in a competitive, we're talking about competitive environments. In
yep,
competitive environments, you're going to be bringing all comer lists, and that
yes,
means that people are going to be bringing their mages. They're going to be bringing their non. In other words, and here's the thing: even if it is balanced, Sam, I think we would agree it's probably not fun.
I agree, and it's one of those things that I like playing shooting armies in Age of Fantasy.
Yeah.
Um, but I can acknowledge that it's oftentimes a lot more fun for the opponent when you're playing against other kind of melee armies, because then it's like you're having the back and forth. When you just get shot off the table, in the first couple turns, and by the time you get to engage, like you don't have anything left. That's it's not fun, and it may be fun for me if I'm rolling all the dice,
Yeah.
uh, but even then, I can acknowledge that that's one of the issues. I think that one thing is like we've talked about earlier. I think they toned down shooting a little bit in general. Um,
I think
one
the
of the
slingshot though is a problem. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
it's
it's like it's not fun for an opponent. Like, here's the thing: indirect has no counter. Like I don't mind getting shot, but if I
yeah
can put units in front, if I can get behind cover, that's tactical depth in the game. But when you have a rule that says I don't care about ignoring, I don't care about cover, I'm
or
just going,
stealth.
or well, stealth I think does now. Now indirect now
Oh yeah, Took you're right.
yeah.
You're right.
Um so stealth is something, but no one likes to just have their units get picked off without anything,
Yeah.
especially the slingshot, by the way, which hits on the 2-up and picks
Yep.
up picks up
Yeah. Yeah.
characters.
You can yeah, being able to pick out, and it's 24-inch range, so it's like if this only had an 18-inch or a 12-inch range, it would probably not be a problem, because then you could
12-inch range.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, you could kind of play around it. But at 24-inch range, like if you space them out properly, you have range on the whole board,
Mm.
basically. And it's you got to be
When we're
careful
talking
with
about,
stuff like
and
that.
that's the clear thing, me and Sam, we're competitive players. We're not talking about having fun. We're talking about
Yeah,
facing some tournament level armies. Um, this could possibly be a concern to us.
yeah, because if you're in a tournament, right, there is always going to be in your local tournament that guy, who takes
uh,
just the hardest list. And sometimes it's fun to do that. Sometimes it's fun especially if everybody knows that's what's going to happen. And if everybody's like on board with, let's bring the hardest stuff. I used to have a lot of fun with Ard Boys back in Warhammer Fantasy days. I would love our Ard Boys tournaments. Where it was the 3,000 point list, where you bring the most terrible thing you could ever bring. And I once brought uh, my entire list was like 60 Chaos Warriors,
yeah.
four War Shrines, and a whole bunch of characters.
Yeah.
And it was so fun, but also like just you had to embrace the love of human suffering to really to
Yes.
really play in an Ard Boys tournament.
Well, and that's where I think the rules can mitigate some of that. And that's what iteration is about, right? We aren't here to say like we love OPR. We're trying to, again, from a competitive standpoint, me and Sam are trying to raise some concerns and be like, hey, this. I would say for me personally, I would love indirect. You lower the points on it. I would like it at the very least. It gets a minus. If you can't see something, at the very least, give it a -1 to hit. I mean, I think that I would actually just prefer spotters. I think that makes indirect more tactical. Either it has to see something or it has to have a spotter. Then I feel it's still powerful, but I feel at the very least your opponent has to do something than just point at something and roll dice. So,
Yeah.
well, that's kind of all we had from our kind of bigger. We're going to get more into some of the more details in later videos with Bozz, but I want to go back to it. Let's have our critique sandwich, right? A lot of good things, Sam. I
Yeah. I actually overall I think the changes have been very good. I think it's going to make the game a lot more enjoyable and a lot more give you a lot more tactical flexibility. The changes with the command groups and casters, especially, to me are a really good thing for people who want to sit down and design lists and have that. I love making lists. I just make lists in my free time a lot. I know a lot of other people do the same. I think these changes really encourage you to kind of get there and be creative, which is something I really like.
Yeah, like I'm already thinking about strategies for the caster's way, and like I'm trying to, like I have so many. I'm just like you, Sam. I have so many armies running around our head. We're definitely going to be playing. Me and Sam, um, assuming the world doesn't end, are going to be playing our Age of Fantasy. We're going to try and bring some stuff. So overall, love it. Some of these things that we're talking about, again, to be clear, may not even be problems. We are more trying to say, let's in this early stages, and it's brand new edition. Hey, here's some things to keep in mind in the context of competitive play.
Yes,
Uh,
we too are mortals. We make mistakes, you know. So we are open to being proven wrong.
so let's end off with just some winners and losers here. I think for us, initially speaking, I think that undead and robot legions look to be some pretty powerful armies right now, right?
Yes, I think the undead changes are definitely giving a bump to them, and so we're gonna have to wait and we're gonna see how it plays out. But I think that those armies are gonna have a lot more competitive options.
And I think rending based armies have
Yes,
rendings based armies have gotten a buff, right?
yes, definitely, and it may be more expensive, but it's still
It's in
it's
everything.
still yeah,
Yeah,
it's in everything. It's universally good, which I think is again is one of the kind of problems with it. And you can definitely, I mean, I'm sitting here as we're doing this, looking at the Duchies of Vinci and doing a rending spam army, and just like, you know, it's that bowling for sixes army.
yeah, yeah. All right, so possibly some people who didn't get out well of the new edition. So there's a lot of Furious based armies that I know they've reduced them in points, but I think a lot of players would happily have paid more points for Furious.
Yeah, it's
Um,
if the Furious nerf is, while I think may have been needed, it may have also been a little bit too much. We'll have to see. But it's definitely, especially in the armies that are not all Furious, but like just some things, I think you're a lot less inclined to take your Furious options now,
yeah,
which
I think
which may be good, but we'll have to see.
yeah, it goes into the same thing, which is kind of swarm and glass cannon armies. I think a lot of units like and I love this change. Don't get me wrong. We're not saying this is bad. These armies were probably a little too powerful in the previous edition, which is basically having basically cheap units that just hit way above their weight. Um, those armies were, to be honest, probably too powerful. It is actually good, but those armies did take a bump, and I think that those armies are actually going to have to reconfigure how they're going to build their armies. They need to, and I think that's probably a good thing. They're going to need to think about how to take their units, which aren't as quite as offensive, and make them work in a different context. At the same time, I think kind of gunline armies have taken a bit of a nerf, right? They are paying more for their weapons and they're also facing more enemies. These armies, Sam, are basically, I think, going to have to start bringing more hand-to-hand armies, right? They're going to have to start bringing more close combat weapons.
Yeah, you're gonna, if it turns out that it's gonna be, yeah, you're gonna, elite stuff is especially with the fearless changes, your elite units are a lot of times I think are better, and you can field more units. You're gonna have to account for that if you're playing more of a gun line, especially, and we'll have to
It's going to be
we'll have to
harder
see.
for gun lines to do their traditional strategy of spend the first two turns clearing the board and
Yep.
then moving up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, and so you're gonna have to see, being. I'm interested to see how this is going to shake up because I don't I'm going to reserve judgment on that one for the most part right now, but
Mhm.
I am interested to see how especially it's going to change the way you have to play the tactics of the game. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we look forward to playing. And we're so happy for the new edition. And thank you guys so much for listening, Sam.
Thank you.
Any war game, anytime.